stage is set for the funeral of Pope Francis in the Vatican. Rome bristles with security this morning as leaders from around the world gather to mourn the late pontiff. Sources tell Sky News around 200,000 people are expected to attend, including the Prince of Wales, who arrives in Rome this morning. Well, this week, 250,000 people have already paid their respects as they filed past the Pope's coffin while he was lying in state. Lisa Holland reports.
After 3 days lying in state in St. Peter's Basilica, the rituals of death for a pontiff recommenced. Pope Francis's face was covered by a white silk cloth, then his casket formally closed and sealed ahead of his funeral. For 3 days, Catholics, clergy and anyone who wanted to share a moment of faith or history queued up to pass by his open coffin and pay their respects. The final mourners entered the basilica early on Friday evening. In all, 250,000 people made the pilgrimage. Throughout the day, there was a build-up of mourners trying to get to the basilica doors before they closed. Amongst them, Patricia and Alessandro, who, even in the crowd, stood out carrying 3 red roses. Up since 4 o'clock in the morning to deliver the flowers to Pope Francis. We brought these roses to symbolise our love for the Pope, says Patricia. We lost our brothers. The roses are also for them. With such a monumental event now so close, in St. Peter's Square we saw acts of spiritual togetherness. Poland's Archbishop of Warsaw spontaneously blessing medics. But a sense of solemnity gave way to mounting tension amongst pilgrims facing a cut-off time to get into the basilica. As the clock ticked down, the crowds got bigger. People struggled to stay together. The feeling of jeopardy, whether they would or wouldn't make it in to see the body of Pope Francis before the doors closed, growing. Are you concerned that you might not get in, that the queue is too big and it's going to close soon?
Yeah, but I will try. I'll still try.
Do you think you're going to make it? Do you think you will get to pass by?
I don't know.
By now, it was so busy, this family from Switzerland gave up hope of reaching the square, let alone Pope Francis's coffin.
Packed. It's really, really packed. But people are happy. The weather is good. All good.
Was it all too much in there?
Enough for me. We had to go back.
Others had a resolute determination to push forward. Anita Gargaro has travelled non-stop from Ecuador since the Pope died. How many days have you been travelling?
2-3 days now.
Non-stop, just to get here?
Yeah, we no sleep. Look at my eyes.
The stage is now set for a global event, the world coming together for the funeral of Pope Francis. Lisa Holland, Sky News, Vatican City.
So here's what we can expect to see today. Officials estimate around 250,000 people visited St. Peter's Basilica over the past few days to pay their respects and see the Pope lying in state in that open casket. Well, the funeral service itself will take place this morning outside in St. Peter's Square. And in a break from tradition, the Pope requested to be buried at Santa Maria Maggiore Basilica, which is beyond the Vatican in Rome. Well, a procession will take him there, passing over the River Tiber. Then, travelling along Rome's main roads, it'll reach the Piazza Venezia, one of the city's key junctions. The procession will then continue past the Colosseum, before turning north and emerging in front of the Papal Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, the Pope's final resting place, which he visited often and had a particularly close connection to. After 9 days of mourning, attention will then return to the Vatican for the conclave, when cardinals will gather in the Sistine Chapel to vote to select a new pope. And once the new pontiff is chosen, white smoke will rise from the chapel's chimney and the bells of St. Peter's Basilica will ring. Well, a host of dignitaries are in the Vatican for today's funeral. So here's who will be attending. From the UK, the Prince of Wales is attending on behalf of the King. The King was in Rome with Queen Camilla earlier this month and met Pope Francis at the Vatican. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has confirmed his attendance. And President Trump is in Rome alongside the First Lady, Melania. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who met the Pope 3 times, is also on the guest list. The Kremlin has confirmed that President Putin is not going, instead sending his culture minister. But the EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, will be there, as will many other world leaders, including the French President Emmanuel Macron, Brazil's President Lula da Silva, Ireland's Taoiseach Micheál Martin, Italy's President Sergio Mattarella and Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, as well as former US President Joe Biden, a Catholic himself. Other royal representatives include Spain's King Felipe and Queen Letizia and Belgium's King Philippe and Queen Mathilde, which all means very tight security in the Italian capital. Our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons has been looking inside police preparations.
We've come to the heart of the police operation, designed to protect the Pope's funeral. From here, they can see everything. This is the high security control room of Rome Police, where they can monitor an array of video feeds. If it happens around the Vatican, they'll see it. Security is an imposing challenge. They're expecting up to 1 million visitors, along with some of the most famous leaders and dignitaries in the world.
The last time we saw something like this would have probably been hundreds of years ago. This is a historic moment. Any potential problem can be immediately passed on to this realm, and that will result in an immediate reaction by the security teams.
Rome is on a high state of alert. Hospitals, aircraft, and even a naval destroyer are all on standby. The papal procession is being hastened for safety reasons. The key to the success of this plan is collaboration. There are officers here from the Rome Police, the National Police, and the military police, as well as the army, the navy, the prison service, the emergency services, and even government secret intelligence. All of them gathered together and ready to react in real time to anything they see on those screens. On the ground, the Carabinieri are in position. The military police, whose officers once fought Napoleon, now here to secure St. Peter's Square, whatever happens.
This is an extraordinary operation that we are trying to manage with our biggest effort. So for this reason, we are to employ all the units that can fight and can face all the problems. So the big flow of people, the common crimes, but we are ready even for biggest and terrifying events.
There are snipers hidden in these buildings, plainclothes police in the crowd, jet fighters ready to scramble. Nerves heightened by the arrival of so many foreign leaders. French President Emmanuel Macron among the first, Hungary's Viktor Orban also in Rome. And President Lula, head of state in Brazil, which has the world's biggest Catholic population. This funeral will be a cradle for kinship, faith, sympathy, and politics.
And Adam joins me now from Rome. So, Adam, as you were saying there, 200,000 people, including 50 heads of state. You can see why security will be such a massive priority. Tell us a little bit about the kind of preparations you're seeing with around 3 hours to go.
Well, I probably don't even have to say. You can see. This is St. Peter's Square, and these are the people who have been rushing in over the past, hour or two in order to try to get themselves a really good location from where they can observe St. Peter's Basilica, and they can just to tell you what is available to these people. Around St. Peter's are some of these big screens which will be showing them the broadcast of the funeral service itself. But what you also see when you look at these crowds is the remarkable combination that you get. You will see nuns, priests, I should say, of various orders, different coloured habits. Within, as I look here now, I can see all sorts of members of the emergency services, young, old, from a variety of countries. You see all the flags flying. And this crowd will just continue to get bigger and bigger. Our colleague Sam here was here in the early hours where this place was completely deserted, and yet now it is filling up gradually. And of course, the atmosphere is growing all the time as well. The latest flurry of people coming in as I speak, a couple of nuns walking along there. So it will gradually fill up. We are expecting hundreds of thousands to come here to the Vatican. The last time the funeral was held here, it was only 50 or 60,000, I think, came for Benedict's funeral. He had, of course, resigned from the papacy nearly a decade earlier. This then the first time that an incumbent pope has had a funeral since John Paul II died 20 years ago, and there is an expectation it will be a huge event. The security will be tight. It's been a no-fly zone above us for days now, and as I was saying in that report, there are plainclothes officers. There are probably about 4,000 police officers on duty, as well as snipers up here and specialist units. The dignitaries, of course, the most prominent of them being Donald Trump, Keir Starmer, Prince William, Emmanuel Macron. We're still awaiting confirmation that President Zelensky will be here, but he remains on the list. It is a long, long line of dignitaries who will be inside St. Peter's Basilica beside me, behind me, I should say, for this funeral. So the security will be tight, and the complexity there is that the coffin containing the late Pope will not be interred inside the Vatican. For the first time in over a century, it will be taken outside the city walls and as we were saying, taken to Santa Maria Maggiore. First time that a Pope has been interred there for going on 400 years. So that creates a difficulty of having to protect that procession, which will probably last an hour or so, while some of these extraordinarily high-profile individuals are leaving the Vatican and heading back to their own countries. And yet the security officials I've spoken to say, yes, it's difficult, yes, in many ways it is unprecedented, but it is something that they are prepared for. But of course, away from the security, the focus will be inside that building. It will be on the funeral service that starts at 10 a.m. local time, 9 a.m. In Britain. It will be held by Giovanni Battista Re, the Dean of the College of Cardinals. He will lead that, and it will end with him commending the soul of Pope Francis to God. Expecting the service to last something about an hour and a half, maybe an hour and 3/4. So that will finish about noon our time here, about 11 o'clock in Britain.
Adam, thanks very much indeed. And just to remind you, of course, we'll have full coverage of the Pope's funeral from 8 a.m. this morning. So do stay with us.
You asked, and we listen.
The first 100 days of Trump 100 is almost over, but we're not done yet.
So we're keeping the podcast going every weekday at 6 a.m.
Join us to stay up to date with the latest twists and turns.
For interviews and analysis.
And stories from across the United States.
You can listen to Sky News Trump 100 now, wherever you get your podcasts.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything. It's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe. Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
On May the 1st, people across the country will head to the polls.
There's a lot at stake.
A seat in Parliament, 1,600 council seats and 6 mayoral elections, all up for grabs.
Who will win the tight race in the Runcorn and Helsby by-election?
Join us for Vote 2025. The results live as they come in, analysis and reaction.
Get the full story fast on Sky News.
Welcome back. Time now to take a look at some of the other top stories around today. And Donald Trump says that Russia and Ukraine have almost reached a peace agreement and has called on both sides to seal the deal. In a post on Truth Social, the US president wrote they are very close to a deal and the two sides should now meet at the very high levels to finish it off. Most of the major points are agreed to. Stop the bloodshed now. We will be wherever is necessary to help facilitate the end of this cruel and senseless war. Well, those comments come shortly after Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, met Russia's President Vladimir Putin to discuss a US-brokered peace plan for Ukraine. Mr. Trump says those talks went well, and the Kremlin said it brought their respective positions closer together. The man accused of killing a US healthcare boss, Luigi Mangione, has pleaded not guilty to the murder. The 26-year-old is accused of shooting dead Brian Thompson in New York in December. Prosecutors have confirmed that they're planning to seek the death penalty. Let's take a look now at some of this morning's front pages. And beginning with the Times, it leads with America's warning to Ukraine's President Zelensky that letting Russia keep the land it currently holds after the invasion is the only choice if there is to be peace. The Daily Telegraph says the Home Office is contacting landlords to try to rent houses for asylum seekers after a surge in migrants crossing the Channel in small boats. Well, The Guardian reports that the EU is planning to ease its post-Brexit rules and allow young people to travel and work freely. Amid America's tussle with China over tariffs, the Financial Times reports that all iPhones being shipped to the US will now be manufactured in India instead. With word of a 13% increase in train cancellations over the past year, the Eye keeps track of the worst-performing rail services. According to the Mirror, British tourists are being warned to expect a hostile reception from locals on the continent who are upset at the number of tourists. The Daily Mail speaks to the presenter Greg Wallace about the allegations of inappropriate behaviour against him, which he's always denied. The Sun says the Gallagher brothers have started playing together again ahead of their much-awaited new Oasis tour, although their neighbours then complained about the noise. The Express predicts that temperatures will rise to 27 degrees next week, which might be why £50 million is being spent on a project to see if it's possible to switch off the sun. That's according to The Star. Talking of stars, time to talk to our political correspondent, Rob Powell, who's at Westminster for us this morning. Hello to you, Rob. We thought we'd chat about some of the political stories on those front pages because they're quite interesting, aren't they? Let's start with The Guardian, shall we, that we've just shown to people. Their headline is EU paves way for youth to travel and work freely. This youth mobility scheme that's been much talked about as part of these discussions of getting a closer relationship between Britain and the EU. What is The Guardian saying here?
Yeah, morning, Anna. What The Guardian's basically saying is that the EU might be prepared to compromise on this, on what they want on this youth mobility scheme, to allow people from the continent to come and work and study in the UK and vice versa as well. And the EU might be willing to put some of the limits on that I think might sort of soothe nerves in the UK a little bit, putting limits to the length of time that people can come into the UK for, maybe 12 months initially and then extended if needed, and also maybe a sort of quota system. And I think the reason for that is that politically that would allow the UK government to go to critics and say, look, this isn't free movement, this isn't allowing lots of people in. Again, this is actually something far more limited. We've got control of the numbers there. It's interesting internally within the UK government, you do sense a bit of push and pull going on about who is in favour of this and who's not. We obviously had the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, I think a week or so ago, saying that this was part of the discussions. Then the guy that's in charge of some of these discussions, Nick Thomas-Symonds in the Cabinet Office, said, no, that's not part of the plan. And then in the last 2 days, we've had the Chancellor in Washington saying and suggesting that the EU trading relationship is even more important than the US relationship. So I think what's happening here is that the Treasury and the Chancellor have got an eye on growth, have got an eye on deepening the relationship with the EU because they believe that's the way to start boosting the flagging UK growth figures. And this might be one of the compromises that they give. Interestingly, this Guardian piece as well also quotes an ex-MP now, Steve Baker, that was involved in a lot of the Brexit negotiations, was the head of the European Research Group. He's saying actually he's pretty comfortable with this scheme as pitched of some sort of exchange youth mobility scheme. What he's concerned about is if the UK starts changing its rules on agriculture to more closely mirror the EU going forward. He said, and almost believes that I think this youth mobility scheme is almost cover for something deeper that may be going on within these negotiations.
Oh, it's an interesting one. I know we're going to hear more about this, Rob, aren't we? Take us to the Telegraph as well. You talked about immigration numbers as part of that last discussion, but this crops up in a very different way on the front of the Telegraph, and quite an interesting story about landlords being approached.
Yeah, this is basically what the technical term for it is dispersal accommodation. It's what the government does to house asylum seekers classed as destitute that essentially don't have the funds, the resources to support themselves. They go to private companies, places like Serco, Clear Springs, who in turn then approach landlords to put the asylum seekers in private accommodation. So in that respect, it's nothing really new in what the Telegraph is reporting. The Home Office is saying as much, that this was something that was started in 1999, that has run under Conservative governments. It's clearly interesting that there seems to be a fresh push to get hold of this accommodation, though. The Telegraph saying that Serco, one of the companies, one of the private contractors, is holding a conference in a hotel in the Malvern Hills to try and attract landlords with the promises of guaranteed rent, and is essentially saying that we need more of this accommodation and more of these properties to come in to house asylum seekers. That obviously raises questions, given that the private rented sector at the moment is pretty tight with high rents and high demand. Adding more demand onto that clearly won't be welcome by many. I think what the government will point to, though, is that actually a lot of the discussion around housing asylum seekers is about putting them in hotels. Housing them in private accommodation like this, it's about 10 times cheaper than putting them in hotels. So they say this is a way of saving the taxpayer money, potentially. Look, that said, the bigger challenge remains, which is stopping those small boat crossings, and at the moment they seem to be running higher than they have done in the last year or two.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Let's take a quick check on the weather now.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weekend will be dry for many and it's set to turn much warmer next week. However, there is some rain around. It'll be a wet start for Irish sea coasts and much of Western Britain thanks to a band of cloud and showery rain. But elsewhere, it'll be mostly dry with some mist and fog patches. This zone of cloud and increasingly patchy rain will edge very slowly eastwards across Scotland, Wales and Western England through the day, with brighter skies to either side.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Stay with us, still to come here on The Breakfast Show. Continuing coverage of the Pope's funeral this morning as thousands of mourners arrive outside St Peter's Basilica.
On May the 1st, people across the country will head to the polls.
There's a lot at stake.
A seat in Parliament, 1,600 council seats and 6 mayoral elections, all up for grabs.
Who will win the tight race in the Runcorn and Helsby by-election?
Join us for Vote 2025. The results live as they come in, analysis and reaction.
Get the full story fast on Sky News.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Drangheta mafia members, they also live among them. Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe. Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
On May the 1st, people across the country will head to the polls.
There's a lot at stake.
A seat in Parliament, 1,600 council seats and 6 mayoral elections, all up for grabs.
Who will win the tight race in the Runcorn and Helsby by-election?
Join us for Vote 2025. The results live as they come in, analysis and reaction.
Get the full story fast on Sky News.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Let's remind you of our top stories here this morning now. And Virginia Giuffre, the woman who accused Prince Andrew of sexual assault, has died at the age of 41. In a statement given to our US partner NBC News, Ms Giuffre's family said she took her own life. Around 200,000 people are expected to attend the funeral of Pope Francis this morning. World leaders, including Sir Keir Starmer, Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron, have arrived in Rome ahead of today's service. The Prince of Wales is attending on behalf of the King. 250,000 mourners filed past the Pope's coffin while he was lying in state in St Peter's Basilica this week. It's estimated 1 million people will try to see his funeral procession through the streets of Rome. And Donald Trump says that Russia and Ukraine are very close to reaching a peace deal. The US leader says most of the major points have been agreed and has called on top officials from both sides to meet. Well, world leaders and religious figures will soon make their way to the Vatican for the service. Amongst them, the interim spiritual leader of the Church of England, Archbishop Stephen Cottrell. He's been talking to my colleague, Anna Botting.
How important is it for you to be in Rome for the funeral of Pope Francis?
Well, it's a huge honour to be here representing the Church of England and Anglicans worldwide. We got here last night. We were met at the airport and brought straight to St. Peter's, where we paid our respects and prayed at the coffin of Pope Francis. He was a great Christian leader who touched the hearts of millions of people across the world. People of faith and people of no faith, people of all faiths. And I think it was because of his authenticity that people could see that first and foremost he was a follower of Jesus, and people saw, the good and beautiful things in Jesus: compassion, humility, kindness, readiness to go the second mile. All those things we saw in him, and it was very compelling. So the world now gathers to give thanks for a good and holy man.
And if Pope Francis was stood here instead of me, what would you personally say to him in tribute?
Oh, well, I would thank him for his witness. I'd thank him for his good humour. This may sound a bit strange, but he kind of didn't take himself too seriously, but he did take the Christian faith and he did take the person of Jesus very seriously, but in such a joyful way. And when I did meet him a couple of years ago, and we spent about half an hour together talking and then praying together, he said to me that me, an Anglican, he, a Roman Catholic, he said we must walk together, we must work together, we must pray together. That was his vision, that the church, which is sadly disunited, and we live in a conflicted and divided world, he said, I think what I heard is that we will find unity and find common purpose by walking together, working together, praying together.
Well, there are some really big political and social issues around at the moment. How to deal with migration? Should you lock up your borders? Do you believe and support same-sex unions? What is a woman? Do you think Pope Francis at least tried to tackle some of them head-on?
Well, what I think I saw in Pope Francis, and what I suppose I hope to live out myself in some small way, is that because he was first and foremost a follower of Jesus, he believed that, well, we belong to one another, that whoever you are, whatever your background, whatever your situation, that we are sisters and brothers, that we belong to one another in Christ, and that in Christ those barriers of separation are broken down. Now, working out what all that means is difficult, and it is conflicted, and it is very contested. But actually, that simple message of, put all that to one side, you are a fellow human being, and I have a responsibility to love you and to see Christ in you, and I pray that you might even see Christ in me. And there was that authenticity about him, that he genuinely loved people. I found out today that some of the homeless people that he regularly used to know and feed here at St. Peter's, they've been invited to the funeral on Saturday. Now that's an example of recognising common humanity.
Is there one standout moment when you met him, something he said that maybe you've taken to your ministry as well?
So probably I've got several standout moments, but probably the one that I turn to most is when I met with him, the meeting ended with him saying, "So shall we pray?" And so, of course, we said the Lord's Prayer together. A prayer which I've said thousands of times. But when we said the opening words of that prayer, Our Father, what struck me was the power and the meaning and the implications of the word our. Again, it's that same message that we belong to each other. We have commitments to each other. It's not my God or my Father. It's ours. I think he demonstrated that in a very beautiful way, which is why the whole world is now turning to Rome in thanksgiving for his ministry. And it's something that I'm trying to live out.
And then the conclave follows. The Sistine Chapel is also behind us. Do you wish the Church of England had a conclave? Would that be an easier way
well, we have
working out who was the next Archbishop of Canterbury?
We have our own ways of doing it.
Takes a bit longer.
It does take longer. And our what's called Crown Nominations Commission will start meeting next month to prayerfully discern who will be the next Archbishop of Canterbury. And in that respect, the processes are the same. I think sometimes people outside think it's a very political process, but my strong hunch is that the cardinals will be asking themselves not, do we need a progressive, do we need a conservative? They'll be saying, who is it who can compellingly tell the story of Jesus Christ to a needy world in their own way, as Pope Francis did in his way? And I can absolutely assure you that's the question I'm going to be asking on the Crown Nominations Commission for the next Archbishop of Canterbury.
Archbishop Stephen Cotterill, thank you so much indeed.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Sky.
Well, the Catholic Archbishop of Westminster, Cardinal Vincent Nichols, will also be at this morning's service, and in a few weeks he'll help elect the Church's next leader when the conclave begins. He told Anna what we can expect from today's funeral.
For me, the procession with his body from Santa Marta through the square into the Basilica, I think was the most moving thing I've ever attended here, actually. It was beautiful. In a way, it was very simple, exactly how any procession would be: a crossbearer at the front, the priest, the body of the dead person, their family following behind. But this was on such a scale and done with such dignity. I just found it deeply moving that there was a kind of self-restraint and yet a very, very profound sense of loss and of appreciation for what Pope Francis had done even in the last week of his life.
Well, that, of course, was on Wednesday. Since then, the doors of the Basilica have been opened.
Yeah.
Thousands of people have come to pay their respects.
Yeah.
And next, of course, the funeral. So how prepared are you for the funeral, and what should we expect?
Well, I don't have to prepare too much other than in my heart and soul. Oh, everybody else does the work. I should be present as a great privilege. I think anybody watching this funeral might think of a member of their own family or a loved one whom they've buried, because it will essentially be exactly the same Catholic rite, but on a grand scale. So I think it's a moment when we really do try and understand that death isn't a passage to oblivion. There is a life to be fulfilled, and that's the firm and certain promise of Christ, that he will take us home. So the language that is used here, and often in any Catholic church, is this person has gone home. They've gone to their final destiny for which they were created, and they've been a faithful person in their lives as best as they can, and therefore we commend them to God's mercy. But we know we stay in a communion with them. There's an abiding presence with you of somebody you've loved, and I think this will be true for millions of people around the world. That Pope Francis isn't disappearing into nothing. He's becoming part of that extended family of God now in his final home.
World leaders are flying in: Trump, Millet, Lula da Silva, Macron of France, the British Prime Minister too. There is some geopolitical awkwardness to the dignitaries arriving. You know, who decides the seating plan down there?
Well, I understand, I've read that it's done with historical precedents, and it's done with royalty first, and then heads of state, and then political leaders. Now, the details I don't remember. I do remember, as you probably do, the last papal funeral, Prince Charles was next to President Mugabe, I think, and that was obviously a little bit tense. On the whole, though, this city, Rome, and the Holy See are very expert at handling these moments, and I believe every state leader and every senior politician will go away knowing that they've been looked after, but also maybe taking a new look at their own responsibilities and maybe seeing themselves as only a part of a human family, not the be-all and end-all of it.
We learned also that Pope Francis had a wish to go past the Colosseum in the procession towards his final resting place. I had a sense suddenly of him as a gladiator fighting for the world, or, you know, looking after the enslaved. You know, what impression would you get from that decision?
I think it's probably to do with martyrs, actually, those who lost their lives for their faith in the Colosseum. One of the very early popes said, don't protect me from martyrdom. He said, I'm ready, I think his phrase was, for the lions to chew me till I become like wheat, to be made into the Eucharist, to be made into a gift to God. So I would guess that that's in his mind, the martyrdom of so many people in the Colosseum for their faith. You know, what fascinates me, that his last journey away from the Vatican behind us was to just go down there to the Regina Coeli prison. And he went in to greet prisoners, and he said to them, you know, except for the grace of God, it could well have been me among you, so don't lose hope. You know, God has you written in his heart, as it were, even though now you're confined to a prison. So I think he always had this great desire to give hope to people who were in the least advantageous positions, and certainly the Colosseum will have seen many of those.
Cardinal Vincent Nicholas, who'll also be at the service this morning. Let's take a quick look at the weather now.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weekend will be dry for many, and it's set to turn much warmer next week. However, there is some rain around. It'll be a wet start for Irish sea coast and much of western Britain, thanks to a band of cloud and showery rain. But elsewhere, it'll be mostly dry with some mist and fog patches. This zone of cloud and increasingly patchy rain will edge very slowly eastwards across Scotland, Wales and western England through the day, with brighter skies to either side. And it'll feel fairly warm in the sunshine with some light winds.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Still to come here on The Breakfast Show. World leaders assemble for the Pope's funeral in a rare moment of geopolitical unity. I'll speak to a former British ambassador to Russia about the diplomacy of it all next.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them. Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe.
Sky News, get the full story first. Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here. In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
On May the 1st, people across the country will head to the polls.
There's a lot at stake.
A seat in Parliament, 1,600 council seats and 6 mayoral elections, all up for grabs.
Who will win the tight race in the Runcorn and Helsby by-election?
Join us for Vote 2025. The results live as they come in, analysis and reaction.
Get the full story fast on Sky News.
day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first.
Well, the Pope's funeral service will serve as an important diplomatic occasion as one of the largest gatherings of world leaders in recent years. So let's discuss all of this. I'm joined now by Sir Tony Brenton, who's former British ambassador to Russia. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us this morning. The main focus of the day will, of course, be the mourning of Pope Francis by millions of Catholics around the world and there in Rome. But it does also mark this extraordinary gathering of world leaders, 50 world leaders in total. What does it say about the power of the Pope that so many are travelling to Rome to see this funeral?
Well, I mean, he was obviously a huge figure in aspiration. He tried to reform an organisation which is very difficult to reform, which is the Catholic Church. First Pope, I think, from Latin America. So actually, the size of the funeral and the solemnity of the funeral rather outweighs the often tawdry politics which are going to take place in the margins of it. Nevertheless, when I was working in the Foreign Office, we had the concept of a working funeral where you took advantage of having lots of leaders together, as we're going to have today in Rome, to do serious diplomatic business. And there's quite a lot of business to be done.
That's so interesting. I mean, will the leaders be concerned, though, about looking disrespectful if they are using an occasion like a funeral for those diplomatic moments?
Yes, absolutely. And indeed, the Italian foreign minister issued a warning yesterday that he didn't want people talking about tariffs in the presence of the coffin. That would be disrespectful. And I think everybody will be very careful not to breach that. The other factor is that time is limited. People are flying in, they're flying out. But nevertheless, Trump has said he's got lots of people wanting to talk to him, and I'm sure that's true. There's lots of business to be done, as I've said. Lots of people want in particular to raise with the United States the problem of tariffs. And possibly the biggest possible meeting here, and I'm not clear whether it's going to take place, likely to take place or not, but it's been said that Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine is expected. And there has been talk, again, Trump has mentioned the possibility of him seeing Trump. And if that happens, that would be the first time they've met since the famous row in the White House a few weeks ago, and might mark an important step in what is a very, very live issue at the moment, the question of getting a peace process going between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, yes, so all eyes on whether or not they will interact. It'll also be fascinating to see whether Donald Trump exchanges words with Joe Biden, his predecessor, of course, who he has repeatedly criticised. But what does the seating plan do in all of this? Because it's going to follow the traditional protocol where the heads of state will be sitting in alphabetical order, French alphabetical order. That's apart from Argentinian and Italian leaders because of the Pope's origins. But does that risk some awkwardness? Will it seat some people together who have an antipathy towards each other?
Well, there's always that possibility. There was a famous moment at some recent funeral where now the king, Prince Charles at the time, found himself sitting beside a representative from Zimbabwe at a time when Zimbabwe was an absolute pariah. You have to watch out for that. But as I say, I think people are very conscious of the solemnity of the event and will be very careful to behave very properly, even if the person they find themselves sitting beside is not someone they would normally want to talk to.
And who do you think Sir Keir Starmer will want to get chatting to and want to have a conversation with?
Well, he'd obviously like to see Trump, even very fleetingly, since we've got very live negotiations going on a trade agreement with America. I imagine if Zelensky is around, he will want to have a quick word with Zelensky as well. He will certainly want to see, if he can, Macron and von der Leyen, because we have a big meeting coming up in London, I think next week, on strengthening UK cooperation with the EU. And he wants to see significant progress there. And there may be things that he thinks he can do quietly in the margins. So there's quite a lot of things for him to do. People who are briefing him will have prepared quite a big pack for him.
And are there any other interactions that you would be looking out for?
Well, I'm at the moment, frankly, obsessed with what's going on Ukraine and the question of Zelensky talking to Trump and hopefully getting the peace process moving again. And the Americans look as if they're pressurizing the Russians to get into direct talks with the Ukrainians, which Putin has been flatly refusing to do. If that can be achieved, then we make a significant step towards getting proper peace discussions going.
And as former British ambassador to Russia, obviously your take on what's been going on is really important. What do you make of what we've heard in the last 24 hours? We've seen Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, travel to Moscow to speak to President Putin. President Trump's assessment of those talks were that they'd gone well, and saying once again that he believes a deal is very close. He said that he is now urging Russia and Ukraine to meet at very high levels to finish the deal off. What do you make of that?
Well, the Americans are talking up the possibilities, but the gap remains very, very wide between what the Ukrainians with European backing will agree to and what the Americans are pressurizing them to agree to. And it is very possible that the next few days are absolutely crucial. Either the American hopes are right and proper talks will get going, or we're in for a road smash, in which they don't get anywhere, they carry out their threat to pull out completely. The Ukrainians and the Europeans then, I assume, will try to continue the war without American support, and goodness knows where that leads us all. I hope that the Americans are right. I hope that we will make progress on talks, but it's by no means guaranteed.
Well, Ukraine will be sitting near the European Union. Union Européenne is closer to Ukraine alphabetically, so it'll be really interesting to see who President Zelensky does talk to if he's there. So Tony Brenton, really interesting to talk to you this morning. Thanks so much.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Good morning. It is 7 o'clock on Saturday, the 26th of April. On today's programme, the Vatican prepares for the funeral of Pope Francis. The ceremony begins at 9 a.m. this morning in Vatican City before a funeral procession through Rome to his final resting place. Some 200,000 people are expected to attend the service outside St. Peter's Basilica behind me. Among them, world leaders who have arrived in Rome, including President Trump and Sir Keir Starmer. Around 250,000 people have already paid their respects at the coffin of the late pontiff, now sealed ahead of the ceremony.
Also today, Virginia Giuffre, who accused Prince Andrew of sexual assault, has died aged 41. Hello, very good morning, and thanks for joining us here on The Breakfast Show. We'll be back with Anna in Rome, where in 2 hours' time, the funeral of Pope Francis will begin shortly, and we'll have full coverage throughout the morning. But first, our top story. Virginia Giuffre, the woman who accused Prince Andrew of sexual assault, has died at the age of 41. In a statement given to our US partner, NBC News, Ms. Giuffre's family said she took her own life. They said it is with utterly broken hearts that we announced that Virginia passed away last night at her farm in Western Australia. She lost her life to suicide after being a lifelong victim of sexual abuse and sex trafficking. They go on to say Virginia was a fierce warrior in the fight against sexual abuse and sex trafficking. She was the light that lifted so many survivors. In the end, the toll of abuse is so heavy that it became unbearable for Virginia to handle its weight. Well, Matthew Thompson is here with me. Matthew, morning to you. Remind us who Virginia Giuffre was and tell us what we know about her passing.
Sure. So Virginia Giuffre was, I think, perhaps the most outspoken, certainly one of the most outspoken of the critics and campaigners against convicted paedophile and billionaire financier Jeffrey Epstein. But in particular, I think most relevant for a UK audience, she also alleged that she had been sex trafficked to Prince Andrew by Jeffrey Epstein when she was just 17 years old. Now, Prince Andrew has always strenuously denied those allegations. There was an out-of-court settlement in 2022, but the terms of that settlement, we should be clear, did contain no admissions of guilt on the part of Prince Andrew. But that certainly brought Ms Giuffre to national prominence here in the UK. She said that she met Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's former girlfriend and co-conspirator, also a convicted sex offender now, in about the year 2000, where she was then introduced to Jeffrey Epstein and entered this world of sex trafficking as a mere teenager. And then in later life, as well as becoming a campaigner, she was American, but she met her husband, moved to Australia. She'd started a family there. She actually started a campaign charity organisation to help victims of sexual trafficking and abuse. But then in recent years, recent months even, it seems as though she had become estranged from her husband and her children as well. You might remember just a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago or so, there was a widely shared Instagram post in which she said she'd been in a car accident that had left her with a few days to live. And then the circumstances of that seemed to be slightly questioned by the Australian authorities, who seemed to say that the accident hadn't been that serious. And then here we are, you know, as I say, 3 weeks later, and clearly the tragic news that she has taken her own life. The incident has been investigated by the authorities in Australia, who say that there's no suspicious circumstances, but clearly a tragedy, and there are well wishes pouring in from all around the place. You've heard from her family, we've also heard from her lawyers as well. She was only 41 years old. Indeed. Matthew, thanks very much indeed. And if you've been affected by this story, you can get in touch with Samaritans by calling the helpline on 116 123 or emailing joe@samaritans.org.
Well, good morning and welcome to Rome, where the stage is set for the funeral of Pope Francis in 2 hours' time. The city bristles with security this morning as leaders from around the world gather to mourn the late pontiff. Sources tell Sky News that around 200,000 people are expected to attend, including the Prince of Wales, who arrives in Rome this morning. Well, this week, 250,000 people paid their respects as they filed past the Pope's coffin while he was lying in state. Let's listen now to Sky's Lisa Holland.
After 3 days lying in state in St. Peter's Basilica, the rituals of death for a pontiff recommenced. Pope Francis's face was covered by a white silk cloth, then his casket formally closed and sealed ahead of his funeral. For 3 days, Catholics, clergy and anyone who wanted to share a moment of faith or history queued up to pass by his open coffin and pay their respects. The final mourners entered the basilica early on Friday evening. In all, 250,000 people made the pilgrimage. Throughout the day, there was a build-up of mourners trying to get to the basilica doors before they closed. Amongst them, Patricia and Alessandro, who, even in the crowd, stood out carrying 3 red roses. Up since 4 o'clock in the morning to deliver the flowers to Pope Francis. We brought these roses to symbolise our love for the Pope, says Patricia. We lost our brothers. The roses are also for them. With such a monumental event now so close, in St. Peter's Square we saw acts of spiritual togetherness. Poland's Archbishop of Warsaw spontaneously blessing medics. But a sense of solemnity gave way to mounting tension amongst pilgrims facing a cut-off time to get into the basilica. As the clock ticked down, the crowds got bigger. People struggled to stay together. The feeling of jeopardy, whether they would or wouldn't make it in to see the body of Pope Francis before the doors closed, growing. Are you concerned that you might not get in, that the queue is too big and it's going to close soon?
Yeah, but I will try. I'll still try.
Do you think you're going to make it? Do you think you will get to pass by?
I don't know.
By now, it was so busy, this family from Switzerland gave up hope of reaching the square, let alone Pope Francis's coffin.
Packed, it's really, really packed. But people are happy, the weather is good, all good.
Was it all too much in there?
Enough for me, we had to go back.
Others had a resolute determination to push forward. Anita Gargaro has travelled non-stop from Ecuador since the Pope died. How many days have you been travelling?
2-3 days now.
Non-stop, just to get here?
Yeah, we no sleep. Look at my eyes.
The stage is now set for a global event, the world coming together for the funeral of Pope Francis. Lisa Holland, Sky News, Vatican City.
So here then is what we can expect to see here today. Officials estimating, as we said, around 250,000 people have visited St. Peter's Basilica over the past few days to pay their respects and to see the Pope lying in state in that open casket. The funeral service itself will take place this morning outside in St. Peter's Square, and in a break from tradition, the Pope requested to be buried at Santa Maria Maggiore Basilica, which is beyond the Vatican in Rome. A procession will take him there, passing over the River Tiber. Then, travelling along Rome's main roads, it will reach the Piazza Venezia, one of the city's key junctions. The procession will then continue past the famous Colosseum before turning north and emerging in front of the Papal Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, the Pope's final resting place, which he visited often and had a particularly close connection to. After 9 days of mourning, attention will then return to the Vatican for the conclave, when cardinals will gather in the Sistine Chapel to vote to elect a new pope. And once the new pontiff is chosen, white smoke will rise from the chapel's chimney and the bells of St. Peter's Basilica will ring. Well, let's go to Lisa Holland now, amongst the crowds who've been flooding in. We've seen people running to get there. Lisa, who is attending today?
Yes, Lara, I think what really strikes you watching people coming through, and this is one of the bottlenecks where bags are being checked for security reasons and people are coming through, and we're very, very close now to where you are. One of the things that really strikes you is just the enormity of the kind of eclectic mix that this event is attracting, the young, the old, people from around the world, different countries, people who've made the effort to come here especially. And also this was a Jubilee weekend for the Catholic youth, so there are a large number of school children here. And also people see this, yes, as a day of grief, but also mourning comes in many forms. We've seen school children clapping and shouting Papa. So really an extraordinary number of people arriving from different parts of the world and of different ages and different groups. Now, literally, as they're coming through getting their bags checked, well, we've just seen Brian and Colette, you've just arrived, you're from Glasgow. Yeah. Could you tell us why you feel it's important for you to be here today?
Well, originally we were booked to come for the Carlos Acutis canonisation. My wife and I...
That's a canonisation of a young...
Yeah, so... but due to the events of the passing of Pope Francis, that had to be postponed and cancelled, so we were coming here anyway, and it's just been an opportunity to come and pay our respects to Pope Francis as a couple and as a family, so we're looking forward to doing that today.
And Colette, what does it mean to you, though, to actually be here, to be part of the funeral, to be part of this day of history?
Well, that's it. It's a day in history, and it's coming together as part of the Universal Church. And when you come to a place like this for this type of event, the enormity of the people and the prayerfulness and the unity is quite overwhelming. It's lovely.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Perhaps the thing you don't expect when gathering for a funeral, that there's almost like this slightly, at this stage anyway, of course people will fall silent later, but there's almost like quite a joyous atmosphere, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a celebration. As you said, the youth festival was on, the Holy Door, you know, and also Carlos Acutis. So all these people coming together, and then sadly the death of Pope Francis has just sort of expanded the amount of people that have decided to come to Rome. So it's a joyous occasion to celebrate the life of Pope Francis and everything that he gave to the Catholic community of the world.
And Brian, 200,000 people potentially are expected today, and an enormous number, maybe more later on. Do you think that reflects a popular pope?
He has been a pope that in some ways has divided, and he's been a pope that's united. It's been an unusual papacy for me. I've lived through Pope John Paul, Pope Benedict and Pope Francis. I think maybe he's looked at the church and tried to lead the church in his own way. So I suppose it's a mixed bag, really, to be honest with you. But he has served the church well, and he's given his life for the church since he became a priest, so that has to be recognised of great value as well.
Brian, Colette, thanks so much. We do appreciate you stopping talking to us. We'll let you go on your way so you can get your position in the crowd. Thank you. Well, as you can see, people still kind of coming in. And as we were saying, from all sorts of nationalities, talking to people yesterday, people who, when the Pope passed away, got on a plane just so they could be here today. One woman travelling 3 days from Ecuador, another just landing yesterday afternoon. It's something that so many faithful in the Catholic Church simply wouldn't want to miss.
Lisa, thank you very much indeed. And yes, I've certainly noticed the teenagers who are milling about, 150,000 of them here for that Jubilee weekend, giving that sense of sort of young, youthful celebration as part of the atmosphere down there amongst the solemnity of today. So what about the dignitaries then? A host of them are also here today. Let's take a look in more detail at who will be attending. From the UK, first of all, the Prince of Wales is here on behalf of the King. The King was in Rome, of course, with Queen Camilla earlier this month and met Pope Francis at the Vatican. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is also here as well. We saw him meeting Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, yesterday. And President Trump is in Rome. He arrived late last night alongside the First Lady Melania, arriving on Air Force One. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who met the Pope 3 times, is also on the guest list. The Kremlin confirming President Putin is not coming, instead sending his culture minister. The EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, will be here. as will many other world leaders, including the French President Emmanuel Macron, who took time to go to see the Pope lying in state, Brazil's President Lula da Silva, Ireland's Taoiseach Micheál Martin, Italy's President Sergio Mattarella, and Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, as well as the former US President Joe Biden, a Catholic himself, who gave fulsome praise on Easter Monday at the news of Pope Francis's death. Other royal representatives then include Spain's King Felipe, Queen Letizia, and Belgium's King Felipe and Queen Matilda. So it all makes for a tight security picture in the Italian capital. Our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons has been looking inside the police preparations and joins me now from the Vatican. Yeah, 4,000 police officers on standby at work today. Adam, that doesn't include the army. It is really a huge security operation underway.
Yeah, it's a massive security operation because it's such a sprawling event. There are hundreds of thousands of people who are going to come to the Vatican or the surrounding areas today to try to be involved in this ceremony, and they are a broad range. As Lisa was talking about, our experience here is that we have seen nuns sprinting to try and get a good location, priests strolling up, a lot of young people, a lot of older people, real cross-section of the world. So the crowds will be huge. They are difficult, of course, to police. But at the same time, St. Peter's Basilica will be housing some of the highest profile people in the world, whether that is Donald Trump, Emmanuel Macron, whether that's the President, the Prime Minister of Italy, Prince William and other royals. So these are targets that clearly have to be defended. We went into Rome yesterday into the control centre, which is monitoring all of the policing and the security service work around this event. And when I asked a spokesperson there, well, just put this into context, you know, how long is it since Italy has had to deal with something on this scale? The reply was a laugh, and they were hundreds of years. It's unprecedented in their opinion. So there are lots of things you can see as you walk around here. You will see various police officers, and there are three strands in Italy. You have the Roman police force, you have the national police, and then you have the carabinieri, who are the military police affiliated to the cavalry going back 200 years. You also have the military itself, the army. We'll have soldiers here. The Navy has a destroyer on standby in the port of Rome. There is a squadron of Eurofighter fighter jets on standby above us, police helicopter. There are snipers in these buildings. So the security provisions are very large, but they've also had to be tailored for this particular event, not least because Pope Francis stipulating that he didn't want to be buried here in Vatican City, but instead at Santa Maria Maggiore. So that will involve a procession through Rome. It is complicated, and at the same time, though, they want people here to enjoy the occasion out here and for it to be sombre and in accordance with tradition inside the Basilica. Complicated, yes, but it's going to be a memorable day.
It will indeed. Adam Parsons, thank you very much indeed, and obviously more from Adam throughout the day. Well, I'm joined now by Father Robert Sirico, President Emeritus and co-founder of the think tank Action Institute.
Acton,
welcome to you.
Acton. Lord Acton.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us here. Talk us through what to expect today, really. At its heart, it is a mass, but what are we supposed to notice?
Yes. Well, I mean, for Catholics or anyone familiar with Catholic liturgy, it will be very familiar to them. The unique things about it, of course, are going to be the cardinals present, and you'll notice they're wearing red vestments instead of the usual white, black, or purple, and that's to symbolize the blood, the sacrifice. And they'll have the consecration and some beautiful music, but I think another dramatic moment at the Mass will come when the casket is blessed, and there'll be a slight procession just around the casket. And I don't know what they have planned, but when John Paul died, they had some of the Antiochian, the Eastern Rite Church, chant a beautiful, haunting chant. I don't know if they'll do that here. They may have something special planned for this.
Beginning to hear music,
yes,
reverberating through those famous colonnades.
This is the Litany of the Saints. So what you're hearing is these invocation of each of the individual saints. If you listen very carefully, you'll hear their names, and then the responses, pray for us. And so they're praying to God for the soul of the Pope.
And how important is for the faithful, the pilgrims who are flooding in, suggestion from the Roman authorities that 1 million people will be in the city, not necessarily, surrounding the Vatican.
Right.
So how important is it to physically be here?
I think in terms of a Catholic sensibility, that is an important thing, or a tactile religion. I think it was Chesterton called Catholicism the religion of stuff. So you'll see incense and water and vestments. And so I think the personal presence would mean a great deal to the people who will be here. Certainly they'll remember it the rest of their lives.
We know in terms of the geography of St. Peter's Square, the clergy will be sitting on the left, the dignitaries on the right, including the kings and queens, the presidents. We know that President Zelensky of Ukraine has now arrived. There was some doubt yesterday about whether he would come. Do you look on the clergy side and see global disorder as you look over, do you think?
I think I see the potential for global unity because they're sitting together in a peaceful environment. And I wonder how much informal sideline conversation would go on. In fact, I think it would be a great homage to Pope Francis were these tensions somehow resolved through conversations, especially now with the debates over tariffs and things like that, if they could kind of come in a different context to an agreement of sorts, at least the beginning of one.
And just very quickly, one final thought about his choice for his place of burial. Why is that significant to him personally?
Well, I think it is part of the whole motif of this pontificate. He chose not to reside in the Apostolic Palace. He chose not to wear the formal garb of the Pope when he was elected. And so now he's choosing not to be buried. Not that all popes are buried there, but that it would be the natural thing that he would be buried
around 100,
there.
I think, isn't it? Yeah.
Maybe a little bit more than 100. There's 266 popes, so yeah, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm very pleased to say you'll be with us throughout this morning.
Thank you.
Our special coverage starting at 8 o'clock this morning, but thank you very much indeed, Father Robert, for the moment. So that ceremony due to start at 9 a.m. UK time. We will have full coverage live from here at the Vatican from 8 a.m. Back to you, Anna.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island. The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe. Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here. In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes,
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
On May the 1st, people across the country will head to the polls.
There's a lot at stake.
A seat in Parliament, 1,600 council seats and 6 mayoral elections, all up for grabs.
Who will win the tight race in the Runcorn and Helsby by-election?
Join us for Vote 2025. The results live as they come in, analysis and reaction.
Get the full story fast on Sky News.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Well, the Archbishop of Westminster, Cardinal Vincent Nichols, will also be at this morning's service, and in a few weeks he'll help elect the Church's next leader when the conclave begins. He told Anna what we can expect from today's funeral.
For me, the procession with his body from Santa Marta through the square into the Basilica, I think was the most moving thing I've ever attended here, actually. It was beautiful. In a way, it was very simple, exactly how any procession would be: a crossbearer at the front, the priest, the body of the dead person, their family following behind. But this was on such a scale and done with such dignity. I just found it deeply moving that there was a kind of self-restraint and yet a very, very profound sense of loss and of appreciation for what Pope Francis had done even in the last week of his life.
Well, that, of course, was on Wednesday. Since then, the doors of the Basilica have been opened.
Yeah.
Thousands of people have come to pay their respects.
Yeah.
And next, of course, the funeral. So how prepared are you for the funeral, and what should we expect?
Well, I don't have to prepare too much other than in my heart and soul. Oh, everybody else does the work. I should be present as a great privilege. I think anybody watching this funeral might think of a member of their own family or a loved one whom they've buried, because it will essentially be exactly the same Catholic rite, but on a grand scale. So I think it's a moment when we really do try and understand that death isn't a passage to oblivion. There is a life to be fulfilled, and that's the firm and certain promise of Christ, that he will take us home. So the language that is used here, and often in any Catholic church, is this person has gone home. They've gone to their final destiny for which they were created, and they've been a faithful person in their lives as best as they can, and therefore we commend them to God's mercy. But we know we stay in a communion with them. There's an abiding presence with you of somebody you've loved, and I think this will be true for millions of people around the world. That Pope Francis isn't disappearing into nothing. He's becoming part of that extended family of God now in his final home.
World leaders are flying in: Trump, Millet, Lula da Silva, Macron of France, the British Prime Minister too. There is some geopolitical awkwardness to the dignitaries arriving. You know, who decides the seating plan down there?
Well, I understand, I've read that it's done with historical precedents, and it's done with royalty first, and then heads of state, and then political leaders. Now, the details I don't remember. I do remember, as you probably do, the last papal funeral, Prince Charles was next to President Mugabe, I think, and that was obviously a little bit tense. On the whole, though, this city, Rome, and the Holy See are very expert at handling these moments, and I believe every state leader and every senior politician will go away knowing that they've been looked after, but also maybe taking a new look at their own responsibilities and maybe seeing themselves as only a part of a human family, not the be-all and end-all of it.
We learned also that Pope Francis had a wish to go past the Colosseum in the procession towards his final resting place. I had a sense suddenly of him as a gladiator fighting for the world, or, you know, looking after the enslaved. You know, what impression would you get from that decision?
I think it's probably to do with martyrs, actually, those who lost their lives for their faith in the Colosseum. One of the very early popes said, don't protect me from martyrdom. He said, I'm ready, I think his phrase was, for the lions to chew me till I become like wheat, to be made into the Eucharist, to be made into a gift to God. So I would guess that that's in his mind, the martyrdom of so many people in the Colosseum for their faith. You know, what fascinates me, that his last journey away from the Vatican behind us was to just go down there to the Regina Coeli prison. And he went in to greet prisoners, and he said to them, you know, except for the grace of God, it could well have been me among you, so don't lose hope. You know, God has you written in his heart, as it were, even though now you're confined to a prison. So I think he always had this great desire to give hope to people who were in the least advantageous positions, and certainly the Colosseum will have seen many of those.
Do stay with us. We've got continuing coverage of the Pope's funeral this morning as thousands of mourners arrive outside St. Peter's Basilica.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
They want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of the Pope's funeral, which gets underway at 9 o'clock this morning. More than 200,000 people are expected to attend today's service, and it's thought around 1 million will line the streets of Rome for a glimpse of the procession. Well, with us for the next half an hour is Ruth Gledhill, who's assistant editor at The Tablet, a weekly Catholic journal. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us while we look at these pictures of Rome as people gather ahead of the service in just an hour and a half's time. First of all, I wonder what your reflections were on today's event and just how important a moment this is for Catholics around the world.
I think it's both important in terms of its symbolism and of its actuality. So its symbolism is obviously massive. We have the death of a pope while in office, which we haven't had since Pope John Paul II, because of course Benedict died after he had ceased being pope and was Pope Emeritus. And so the heads of state have gathered, and it's the biggest gathering like this since, really, in the church since the funeral of Pope John Paul II. And it is huge also. It's not just in terms of the gathering itself, but what follows afterwards, the conclave. And we have that in very quick succession after the 9 days of mourning at the end of the funeral. And that will end probably, the conclave will probably start a week on Monday. But in terms of world events beyond the church as well, it's hugely momentous because Pope Francis was a voice from, politically, he was seen as a voice on the left, although he was really just preaching the Christian gospel, care for the poor, the marginalised, refugees, migrants. But of course, in the way the current world is going, with Trump, who's there, obviously, at the moment, and with other far-right developments in other countries, you know, he was a rare voice standing out in opposition to what seems to be a prevailing trend in many parts of the world. And so this is an opportunity now for people from the right, from the conservative side of the political equation, to try and lobby for a pope more. Maybe they will try and lobby for a pope or want a pope who's going to be more towards the centre or towards the right. And so I imagine there might be some in America, for example, who might want a pope that's more like Putin's Orthodox Church. I shouldn't say it's Putin's Orthodox Church, but a church that seems to support Putin very much. And so I'm sure there'd be lots of Americans who would dream of a pope who would be much more of a supporter of a more conservative agenda.
Yeah, so many people gathering there, obviously reflecting on the life of Pope Francis, but perhaps also mindful of what happens next. But as we say, a huge number of people in attendance, 200,000 people expected to attend, as you say, 50 heads of state as well, and 1 million people coming to Rome in order to be part of the day's event, perhaps witnessing the procession that the coffin will take after the service. How important do you think it is for people to feel connected, to be in Rome to witness today's events?
I think it's absolutely massively important. And there was a youth occasion also that was due to take place this weekend that's been postponed about Carlo Acuti. And so there's many young people there anyway, but also the procession of the coffin and of the Pope to the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore. It will be the first time in more than a century that a Pope has not been buried in St. Peter's, in the Basilica. And this is very significant because he will be greeted at the Church of Santa Maria, which he loved to visit before he went off on foreign trips, and where he there was a particular icon of the Virgin Mary that had a lot of meaning for him. And this is why he's being laid to rest there. He will be greeted there by people from the communities of the poor and the marginalised, the communities he felt particularly close to and drawn to. And that is a real departure from tradition that is in keeping with the whole of his papacy and the fantastic tone of his papacy, and the way he didn't change much in terms of doctrine, but in terms of tone and image and presentation, he really did set a different style.
Yes, well, Ruth, do stay with us because we will come back to you a little bit later, but I want to bring in another guest now. Archbishop Ignatius Ayo Kagama of Abuja in Nigeria joins me now. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us this morning. I wonder what today means to you. How important a moment is this to see the funeral of the Pope and watch him taken to his final resting place?
It's an emotional moment, and the Pope has been very active on the stage of the world. He has been to the nooks and crannies of the world, and he's touched so many people, and more in Africa. We feel this monumental loss. And
yeah, you talk about how you feel his loss in Africa. As I understand it, Pope Francis didn't visit Nigeria, but it does have the second largest Catholic population in Africa. Do you feel that his influence was still felt on the Catholic Church in your country?
of course, we daily pray for the Pope. We are in touch. We have dynamic nuncios here who have always kept us connected to the Pope and given messages and received messages from here forwarded to the Pope. So yeah, we would have loved to see him physically, just like we saw John Paul twice, Pope John Paul II twice. And we had asked at a meeting during our ad limina if the Pope would visit. He only smiled and said, "I will try." He allowed us to sit in a circle to discuss freely with him. And it was just so good because like in Africa, the elders sit together under the mango tree, they discuss issues of interest, and he allowed us to do that. And it was at that moment we asked him directly, "Are you coming to Nigeria?" He smiled and said he will try. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. He is in heaven now. We believe from there he can even visit us more in terms of praying for us and ensuring that the problems and challenges we have in Nigeria will either be minimized or eradicated completely.
And we've been looking at the live pictures of Vatican City. We've seen some of the cars arriving, world leaders, of course, from around the world turning up, 50 heads of state in total. How do you think he was regarded by political leaders, and do you think he had lessons for them?
Yeah, those who really mean well for their people should learn a lot from Pope Francis, a great teacher, a witness. He's not somebody who just talks. He acts out what he says is right and should be done. And this was obvious in the ways he related to the poor. He was their loudspeaker, so to say. He was their voice and very close to them. The migrants that came from nowhere, he advocated they have been accepted and integrated. The elderly, the grandparents, the prisoners, he visited and washed their feet, and many others he touched in different ways. So we hope our leaders will be able to stoop so low like Pope Francis did to serve their people with honesty and great dedication. He washed the feet of his apostles and did, associate with the lowly, those considered sinful and outcasts and marginalized. He was there for them. So our leaders should use the resources, especially in Africa, the resources available to serve their people honestly and truthfully. Unfortunately, most leaders are self-centered and only are concerned about acquiring more and more wealth, and they're promoting their welfare and comfort. Pope Francis was selfless and always self-giving. This is how a good leader should be.
And the process to elect the next Pope won't start for some days, but do you have any thoughts on who you'd like to replace Pope Francis? Would you like a sense of continuity, someone with a similar approach?
Of course, each Pope will pick up from where the last Pope left. These legacies we have talked about are all very good ones, and it would not be right to abandon them. So I expect that the next Pope would continue with these activities of his, anything to do with love, mercy, forgiveness, selflessness, and so on. These are not new. These are gospel values. And I hope the next Pope will imbibe this, embrace this, and ensure that they influence his pontificate. I am very optimistic. Definitely, he will come with his own perspective of things and his own background and all that. But the common denominator is that we are all seeking for what is good and what will make the world a better, happier, and peaceful place.
Well, Archbishop Ignatius Ayu Kagama, thank you so much for joining us there from Abuja in Nigeria. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. God bless.
And Ruth Gledhill is still with me here. Really interesting to talk to the Archbishop there, and such a sense of respect and love for this Pope.
Yes, there was. And although the Pope didn't visit Nigeria, he did have his mission, but was very much related to countries like Nigeria, where the Christians are suffering so much at the moment and where there are so many difficulties, as the Archbishop said. And I think that the love and respect has really come out for the Pope over the last few days since his death. But even when he was in office, you know, his manifestly open mission to the people from the ends of the earth. And when he was made Pope himself, when he was elected Pope, he said, they've gone to the ends of the earth to choose this Pope. And those are the people he reached out to. And those are the people who are mourning most, I think, his passing. Although everyone is it's very sad to see the end of this really radical, changing Pope.
And while you're talking, we can see the cars continuing to arrive there at the gates of Vatican City. As we say, so many dignitaries, around 130 delegations from around the world and 50 heads of state. But also, interestingly, reflecting what you've been saying about the Pope, there will be refugees there will be homeless people there will be prisoners there as well, as Pope Francis wanted. What does that tell us about this Pope, this sense of inclusivity?
It tells us that his mission, as stated from the very start of his papacy, when he appeared on the balcony and chose to forego much of the trappings of office, the red shoes, the white trousers, which he said would make him look like an ice cream seller. It shows us that this Pope really did fulfil what he walked the talk as well as talking the talk. He did fulfil what he said he was going to do and reach out constantly to the poor, and it was in his writings and in the way he did things. He was a man in a hurry because he was 76 when he was elected, and he thought he wouldn't have as much time as he did, I think. So he did try and do an awful lot. But, and so I'm sure his successor will maybe consolidate on that. But he really did make people love him, and people really loved him because he was so accessible. Really a Pope, despite his age, a Pope for the modern age.
And as you say, so hardworking. In fact, some poignancy in the fact that his funeral takes place in St. Peter's Square, exactly where he was last seen in public less than a week ago on Easter Sunday. Stay with us, Ruth. I'm going to bring in another guest now. Lord Darragh, a former British ambassador to the US, joins me now. Very good morning to you, Lord Darragh. Thanks so much for talking to us. We are watching the global leaders arriving ahead of the funeral. So many of them coming, 50 heads of state in total. Why is it important, do you think, for these leaders, many, of course, who aren't Catholic, to be there?
Well, first of all, this is a big international event. It just is. And it would be appropriate whether you're a Catholic or not to go and attend the funeral of someone who contributed so much and such a huge figure on the global stage. But second, of course, Anna, it is an opportunity for international diplomacy. There is an awful lot going on in the world at the moment, a lot of it very bad news, and President Trump is at the center of much of it. He's going to be there, so it is an opportunity to talk to him. Two constraints, though. Number one, it's a funeral, and you're meant to be there to pay your respects to the Pope who has died, and so you have to be discreet about doing your diplomacy in the margins, away from cameras. And second, there are so many people, I think, who have issues with current American policy, whether on tariffs or on Ukraine, that there'll be a lot of people who want to talk to Trump, and so it's going to be brief exchanges with him, not exchanges where you do deals, but exchanges where you get a chance to express your concerns and just register them with the president.
Yes, and we've had a confirmation that Joe Biden, Donald Trump's predecessor, has now arrived there ahead of that service, someone else who had tensions with Donald Trump. The leaders, though, are all going to be placed in French alphabetical order, which avoids the headache, at least, of organising a diplomatic seating plan, but it could risk some awkward moments, couldn't it? I mean, and there are plenty of tensions amongst those attending.
Yes, I can't immediately guess what that means in terms of who will sit next to who. But I do notice from media reports that Trump is in the third tier behind royalty and other guests who rate above in terms of protocol. So it's not front of the picture for the American president this time, which is unexpected for him, I guess. He's not where he normally finds himself. But he'll be seated with a lot of other leaders, all of whom, as I say, likely to want to try and catch a few words with him. There may be something of a cue there.
Well, yes, and what interactions would you be looking out for?
Well, I think, first of all, on Ukraine, European leaders will be worried about what we read about the American position on Ukraine and the pressure that seems to be being put on President Zelensky, who will be there as well, of course, to basically capitulate both on territory and on Ukrainian sovereignty. So I think Europeans will want to catch up with Donald Trump and say, is this where you really are? Because it doesn't look like a route to a fair deal. And then all of those countries, and there are, there'll be dozens of leaders there whose countries are affected by tariffs, even though they're temporarily suspended, who I think will want to say to Donald Trump that these tariffs are not fair and are not a good idea and will do damage to the whole global economy and potentially send us into recession. So as I say, everyone will have a kind of issue with the president. He may get a bit tired of hearing all this stuff over the course of today.
And what about Sir Keir Starmer? Who would you expect him to try to have a few words with?
Well, I expect he will want to have a few words with the American president. I think he'll want to talk to other European leaders. I expect him to talk to Zelensky and to reassure Zelensky about the total UK support for Zelensky's position that I think he expressed to the British media yesterday. And then it's also an opportunity for him to see some leaders who are there who he won't normally come across, whether at European meetings or in the course of normal events. And therefore it's an opportunity to catch a few words with some of those leaders who we won't normally see very often.
And how much preparation, I mean, you're a former diplomat, how much preparation is given to leaders at events like this on how to handle the situation, about how to be able to take advantage of the moment without looking disrespectful?
Yeah, well, on the protocol of it all, and not looking disrespectful, I mean, I trust Keir Starmer, people would have talked to him about this, but he would naturally understand that you shouldn't be visibly engaged in international diplomacy during the funeral ceremony or when you're on camera. But he will have, if it's anything like my days in the Foreign Office, he will have more or less a book of briefs, each one quite short, but each one covering what he might say, both to other leaders who he will seek out, like Zelensky and Trump and other European leaders, and those he may just run across in the course of events. So he has something to say if there are leaders from Africa or Asia who he hasn't actually arranged to try and have a few minutes with. So there'll be an awful lot of briefing for him to read on the way across, and he'll be pretty busy.
And finally, Lord Darroch, some of the leaders coming today had a less than straightforward relationship with the Pope, not least Donald Trump.
Yes, but you would expect them to put that aside and to pay respects appropriately to a man who, even though he said things that in their eyes might have been controversial, was clearly an exceptionally good, caring man, and who did, from all that I understand, an exceptional job as Pope. So I wouldn't expect to hear anyone say anything remotely controversial or critical about this guy. This is a moment to celebrate his life and his achievements.
Well, Lord Darroch, we really appreciate your time this morning. Really interesting reflections on this funeral, which brings together so many people. Thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
And Ruth Gledhill is here with me in the studio. What are your reflections on this coming together? I mean, it is so notable that there are so many heads of state gathering there today. I mean, is that normal protocol for a funeral like this, or does it say something about this Pope that so many want to travel so far to pay their respects?
I think it's not neither nor. It's both. So it says a lot about the respect that people have and had for this Pope, and the way he was so brave and courageous in changing so much about the tone and the manner the papacy was conducted, the way he spoke out so often and was so accessible and was available and made his views felt on so many things, and was so passionate about the Christian teaching and the gospel. And his encyclicals reflected that from Laudato Si onwards, the way he tried to create a more relaxed church mood around issues like lesbians and gays, LGBT, women in leadership. He didn't go as far as some people wanted in terms of, for example, allowing the ordination of women deacons or even putting that on the table. But he nevertheless did change the way the church speaks and even thinks about these things. So I think that his successor will inevitably be someone who will have to consider how he progresses that legacy. But also in terms of protocol, of course, this is all in keeping with protocol. But it's been a long time, quite a long time since Pope John Paul II we had, and then Pope Benedict, who died after he'd left the papal office. And so that's only two, really. So it's still a developing thing. It's still, it's in the modern media age, things are bound to reflect the changes in our wider society, as well as the protocol and the respect for the Pope.
That's so interesting. And within all those rules and rites of a Pope's funeral, how much of a sense of the man are we likely to get during the service, do you think? How much of that personal touch is likely to come through?
The actual service itself is very much standard Catholic liturgy. It's in Latin. The first reading, though, is in English from the Acts of the Apostles. And it will be very familiar to Catholics around the world. And possibly familiar to a lot of non-Catholics as well, to other Christians, but to non-Christians too. It will be familiar in terms of, there's been many televised funerals of heads of state and other Christian leaders that people will have watched. So it is, and I think that feeling of familiarity is important because it makes it seem exceptional, but also kind of normal.
Well, Ruth Gledhill, we really appreciate your time. As we reflect ahead of this funeral that is due to take place at 9 o'clock our time this morning. Ruth, thanks very much indeed. Do stay with us. We'll have continuing coverage with Anna Botting live in Rome in the next hour.